working? I can't see anything. I guess it's not working. But if it is working, this is Dovahhatty. The Mad Emperors. Unbiased History, Rome X. Get serious now. So, this is going to be broken into 2 parts. Let's go ahead and do the first of the 2 parts now.
Born 75 years ago. For 40 years I have ruled as Rome's emperor. But for all these years I have never been the ruler of my own life. I have seen the borders of Germania, beyond which no civilized.
Okay. So, why can't we, Okay, there, that works a little better. End video.
I may see. Behold, in chaos, a barbarian sweeps the future. This is the 19th of August, the year of Romulus, 767. These are the closing decades of the Julio-Claudian dynasty and the final seconds of my life.
Okay. Well, that started out ominous. Yeah. I've seen this commercial. I've heard it. And now we're back to the video.
Augustus was dead. Having been secretly poisoned by his wife, his remaining relatives mourned him, as she made the preparations for Tiberius' ascension as emperor. That of course included having Postumus executed, and later having Tiberius show up to the Senate, where he was proclaimed the new princeps. He refused most titles and responsibilities they gave him, but as he would find out, the senators were men fit to be slaves. With Tiberius now the emperor, he was faced with revolting legions demanding more pay in Pannonia. To settle that, he sent his son Drusus the Younger, alongside the Praetorian prefect, Sejanus, both of whom hated each other. But then the legions in the Rhine also mutinied, so Tiberius sent Germanicus to them. Seeking to live up to his father and avenge the betrayal at Teutoburg, Germanicus calmed the mutineers through his endless charisma, paying their salaries out of his own pocket, and promising that anything they looted in their hunt for Arminius would be theirs to keep. Wow. Germanicus then crossed the Rhine with his legions, ransacking the Germans in a righteous punitive campaign, taking Arminius' wife as prisoner and recovering the 19th Legion's Eagle Standard. He then slaughtered his way into the Teutoburg forest, witnessing the purest essence of Germanic barbarity. Desecrated bodies, guts spilled over trees, remains of live sacrificial burnings, chaotic evil at its worst. He had his men bury the dead and honor their memory, only then returning to the campaign. Enraged, he attacked the Cherusci heartland, crushing Arminius at the Battle of the Weser River, and then honoring Tiberius by building a mount with the Germanic weapons captured, which triggered Arminius so much that he attacked again, and again Germanicus crushed him, then building an even bigger mount, honoring Tiberius, Mars, Jupiter, and Augustus. Germanicus then sailed back to Gaul through the North Sea, getting suddenly struck by a storm conjured by Neptune. But not only did Germanicus survive, but he personally rescued hundreds of soldiers by dragging them into the coast. And to end the campaign in good taste, he again raided Germania, annihilating the Marsi tribe and recovering yet another Eagle Standard. If you still don't love the guy, allow me to quote Tacitus. Germanicus did not want any prisoners, as the extermination of the Germanic tribes was the only conclusion he saw for the war. Fucking based. Oh, and Arminius? Backstabbed by his own tribesmen. A treacherous death for a treacherous germ. As Germanicus returned to Rome to celebrate his triumph, he was followed by his wife, Agrippina the Elder, together with his 5.5 children, among them Gaius Julius Caesar, named after his great-great-great-great-uncle, dressed by his mother with a pair of small soldier boots, forever gaining him the nickname Caligula. Also, Claudius, Caligula's uncle, had just recently married to a woman that would later cuck him. Such was life for Uncle Claudius. The only other one not having a good time was Livia, whom feared that Germanicus' popularity would eventually allow him to overthrow Tiberius, even though he was extremely loyal. But hey, since when has that stopped Livia before? And so she began bitching at Tiberius to have Germanicus withdrawn from the Rhine legions, and to shut her up, Tiberius gave his nephew command over the eastern half of the empire, which was even worse, so Livia sent her servant, Gnaeus Piso, along with him, just to make his life a living hell. He would cancel his orders, counter his opinions, unmake his reforms, and not even when visiting the ruins of Troy was he safe from his bullshit. So Germanicus departed to Egypt to get away from Piso, which Livia took as the last straw. And so, having also partaken of the divine Julian semen, she used her own black magic to conjure a poison for Piso, who then put it in Germanicus' food. Before long, Germanicus fell deathly ill, and died in front of his family, striking his wife with as much sorrow as it did anger. She immediately filed for Piso to be prosecuted for murder, thinking that Tiberius was behind this. The Senate happily obliged, condemning Piso to death, and before he could snitch on Livia, she hastened his execution. And just as things were getting bloody, Claudius asked Tiberius to let him start the Cursus Honorum, but Livia made him forbid it. He had once tried writing a history of the civil wars, and it really put Livia in a bad light, so she kept making his life miserable. The reality was, Tiberius was trapped between his mother's dictatorship and the Senate's incompetency, so he began relying on Sejanus more and more, whom used this to further his ambition to one day become emperor. And with the new heir, Drusus, hating him so much, Sejanus seduced his wife, Livilla, to conspire together with him. Convinced, Livilla had her husband poisoned, and with his death, Sejanus asked Tiberius to marry Livilla. Easy to say Tiberius refused. So Sejanus settled with pressuring Claudius to marry his relative, Aelia, whom would endlessly physically abuse him. Such was life for Uncle Claudius. Tiberius then considered Claudius as his new heir, but he backed off fearing Sejanus' wrath. Struck with grief and endless paperwork, Tiberius let Sejanus bear almost all tasks of state, secluding himself to the island of Capri, while Livia and Sejanus used his authority to either expel or execute anyone they wanted. Livia made sure to kill as many innocents as possible before her time came, secretly advising Sejanus to get rid of Agrippina and her children for Tiberius' sake, which he heeded for his own sake. One night, as the imperial family had dinner, Tiberius offered Agrippina some fruit, but she viciously refused, suspecting poison. Sejanus then used this as an excuse to accuse Agrippina of misbehavior, and her eldest son Nero of sexual degeneracy, banishing them both, and later her other son Drusus as well. The three of them will later be either beaten to death, starved to death, or in Agrippina's case, both. And since we're talking violence, some Jew with god delusions just got crucified in Judea. From here on, his followers would increasingly infest the empire with their sacrilege against the divine Caesars and overall Christ cuckery. There's something to all this, but that's for way later. And now, with most of his family now dead, Caligula and his sisters were invited to join Tiberius in Capri, alongside Gemellus, Drusus' son with Livilla, whom Tiberius wished to have co-rule the empire with him, later marrying Caligula's sisters off one by one, and later him to a girl named Junia, whom died in childbirth, so whatever. Caligula blamed Tiberius for his relatives' deaths, but whenever he prepared to stab him in his sleep, the ghost of Augustus would appear and discourage him from such a dishonorable act. Back in Rome, Sejanus had become so powerful he was the de facto emperor. He had his enemies or anyone really executed without end, had his birthday celebrated as if he was part of the imperial family, and even schemed with Livilla to ally with the surviving Julians. And
okay, so everyone here is related, but yet they've done nothing but backstab each other. It's just amazing. No wonder if you came into power, you had to first look, the people who were going to kill you were going to be the ones related to you. It's just amazing. It's fascinating.
overthrow Tiberius, making him the regent of both Gemellus and Caligula, whom he would later betray. But even Tiberius had his limits. He might not care how many senators Sejanus kills, but threatening him and his heirs was enough. Sejanus was then called onto the Senate, where he was denounced and tried guilty of treason, with his lover Livilla being ousted as well. Sejanus would be strangled to death, and Livilla imprisoned by her mother Antonia, whom had her starved to death. But Tiberius' lack of will to rule the empire was indeed troublesome. So one night, as he slept, Caligula gently had him suffocated with his own bed sheets, at the bold age of 77, a far more graceful way to kill an emperor. And with his great uncle...
Okay. I think I've outside of battles with major massacres, I have to have listened to more people dying in 8 minutes than most.
And with
videos.
His great uncle now dead, Caligula was acclaimed the new emperor, later denying Gemellos of his inheritance. That kid had gone insane over the years, and Caligula knew the last thing Rome needed right now was a madman as emperor, later having the crazy kid executed. His grandma Antonia literally killed herself over this, but oh well. Caligula was then received into Rome, cheered by the crowds as the son of the great Germanicus, leading to over 160,000 animals being sacrificed in his honor. During the first few months of his reign, he threw all of Sejanus' old treason trial documents into the fire, pardoned countless exiles and prisoners, reduced taxes to unprecedented lows, upped the soldiers' pay dramatically, and threw several games and parties in honor of his dead family members, whose remains he had recalled to Rome, and buried alongside Augustus in his mausoleum. By then, his uncle Claudius had just finished the history of the Etruscans and Carthaginians, so Caligula celebrated it by making him consul with him, mixing him up into
I just figured he celebrated it by reading the book and then killing him.
crazy cults that costed a fortune, all for the sake of banter. But as he worked his way into the hearts of every Roman, Caligula was struck with a devastating illness. Forced into his bed, he suffered immensely, after having prophetic visions of the future and losing consciousness. When he finally woke up, Caligula had realized the truth. He had become a god. Embracing his duty to act as a god, Caligula started a harem around his own sisters, especially Drusilla, whom he treated in all ways as his wife, despite the fact that she was married to the great-grandnephew of Lepidus. To match his divine status, the gods inflicted on Drusilla the same illness that afflicted Caligula, but she couldn't survive the divination process. In order to channel his grief and
Does anyone know what the illness was that he got hit with and then killed his sister wife?
anger in a constructive manner, Caligula followed on his father's steps and marched his legions beyond the Rhine. There he would crush only one Germanic horde. All in all, his father's previous campaigns had really devastated the area, thank the gods, so instead, he set his eyes on Britannia. But to successfully invade, he would have to face Neptune, the god whose ocean storms had greatly troubled both Caesar and his father's campaigns. Standing god to god, Caligula confronted Neptune on a one-on-one combat for the fate of Britannia. The writings detailing this divine conflict have been lost to time. All we know was that after a long struggle, Caligula had emerged victorious, and then plundered Neptune's precious seashells as victory spoils. Having taken too much damage, Caligula postponed the invasion of Britannia. Good thing too, as he just then learned that his friend Lepidus had been plotting against him, all while banging both of his sisters Agrippina the Younger and Julia Livilla. Ashamed at being related to such adulterers, he banished them both, then had Lepidus killed. Later returning to attend a wedding hosted by Gaius Piso, whose wife he took a liking to, so he took her right then and there, openly telling Piso what felt like taking her virginity. Then he grew bored and divorced her the next day, doing her a favor and forbidding her from marrying Piso. That guy was trouble and everyone knew it. Caligula then experimented by marrying Lollia, but he wasn't into that pedo stuff. So, as a god of divine taste, Caligula married a big-titted MILF named Caesonia, whom he showed openly naked to his friends, casually threatened to kill, and conceived a child with her, named after his late sister. He then came to understand his true nature as a new god, a new Jupiter, and yes, as Neos Helios, the new sun. Then starting to cut off the heads of statues and substitute them with his own, ordering many temples to be built in his honor, and in time began to treat the disgusting mortals he was surrounded with as they deserved. As Caligula traveled in his carriage, he forced the senators to run alongside him, punishing those who couldn't keep up. Once, as he watched the gladiatorial matches and they ran out of gladiators, he used his powers to throw an entire section of the pleb audience into the arena to be eaten by the lions, so he wouldn't get bored. Whenever he needed money, he sent agents to rich citizens' houses to be executed and their property confiscated, never bothering to come up with some faggot-ass excuse to justify his divine whim. As he watched his prisoners being tortured and screamed for mercy, he would have their tongues cut off to enjoy the execution in peace, telling the torturers to make them feel like they're dying. One day, he had the entire Roman fleet align in a tight single-file formation alongside the Portus Iulius Bay, crossing it on horseback just to prove Tiberius' old astrologer wrong. One night, as he received the client king of Mauritania for dinner, he suddenly realized the whole concept of client kings was gay, so he had him killed, and his kingdom annexed into the empire, later sending the legate Paulinus to crush any provincial revolts there, something he would become an expert on. And once the Jews started complaining at Caligula's statues being placed in their synagogues, he ordered that a statue of himself be placed on the Temple of Jerusalem itself, renaming it as Temple of Illustrious Gaius, the New Jupiter. As he returned his attention to the Senate, seeing the sheer stupidity and incompetence the senators displayed, for the good of Rome, Caligula appointed his horse as consul, who proved to be smarter than the whole Senate put together, and with Rome now in his horse's capable hooves, Caligula prepared to move to Alexandria, where he hoped to further understand his divinity. But just as his unrivaled banters and godly virtues made him popular with the plebs, so had he driven his enemies to the edge of envy and resentment. They were revolted by the existence of someone so divine, even more so one whom they owed their souls to. Unable to bear the thought of Caligula returning to Rome more powerful once more, a conspiracy was born, led by a senator named Cassius, with Carrera being his last name, Cassius Carrera. The thing with Carrera was that, as a Praetorian guard, he couldn't stand being a constant target for jokes, being the feminine-voiced, balls-chopped manlet that he was. So one day, as Caligula addressed some actors during a festival in honor of Augustus, Carrera and 2 others ganged up on him, stabbing him to death. You could say that he lived up to his name right to the end, and beyond it as well. But killing the God Emperor, as far as that is possible, wasn't enough. No, he had to invade the Imperial Palace and kill every single member of the Imperial family he could find, including Caesonia and their infant child, whom he had thrown at the wall and its skull crushed. Such is the wrath of ugly feminine incels. But as the loyal elements in the Praetorian Guard showed up...
I don't think that's incel. I think that's just a psychopath who got tired of another psychopath.
They eventually found Claudius hiding from Carrera behind a curtain. Then they all turned to him and proclaimed him their new emperor. As Claudius met with the Senate, he graciously pardoned all conspirators, except Carrera, who he had executed. So yeah, Claudius is emperor now. Funny that. You wouldn't expect someone whom Livia had raised by an abusive ex-mule driver to end up anywhere in life. But here we are. Knowing that his best strategy would be to imitate Augustus as much as possible, Claudius renamed himself after the original princeps, which would become common practice. To start off in a good light, he exempted the ruins of Troy from taxation and affirmed the rights of Jews to... Let's hope that works out. He also built a ton of shit, aqueducts, roads, the works. One of his big projects was to try and drain the Fucine Lake, but the drainage pipe backed up and submerged the entire effort. A humiliating affair, but such was life for Uncle Claudius. Claudius then assumed the office of censor alongside Lucius Vitellius, the father of Aulus Vitellius, a really fat cunt, remember that, using his office to purge all of his enemies from the Senate. And yeah, Claudius had enemies. Mostly senators as blasted at how he had welcomed even more civilized Gauls into the Senate than Caesar once did, killing some 35 senators and 300 equestrians in total. It's no real purge, but hey, it's a start.
So I'm going to stop it here. It's 300 people or whatever. It's no real purge, but yeah. Okay, so this is part 1. Can only guess that there's going to be more deaths for part 2. Okay, I'm going to end this here. Like and subscribe. Sorry I didn't talk more, but I had to keep up with all the murders. Alright, well, until the next one comes out, this will come out tomorrow, and part 2. And until it does, have a good day, have a good night.